A little thug took advantage of the moment and stole a few packages, among which were 2 bottles of expensive bourbon whiskey. He thought he had hit the jackpot, unaware that these 2 bottles would trigger a crime. The courier, David Wong, was a diligent young man. By the end of 2017, the delivery volume had surged. On the evening of December 14th, around 7 o'clock, as darkness began to fall, David arrived at Building 7 in Happiness Garden. After grabbing the package, he quickly ran upstairs. But when he came back down, he was stunned. His motorcycle and all 6 remaining packages had vanished. Happiness Garden was an old complex with many entrances and exits. Despite having property management, security was practically non-existent. There weren't even any surveillance cameras. David searched around like a headless chicken but found nothing, so he had no choice but to call 911. The police arrived quickly, asked about the situation, and took notes. David anxiously asked how soon they could catch the thief. The officer calmly replied that this ordinary theft was not a serious case. If they were lucky, they might catch the thief in a few days. If not, who knows when. Without surveillance, and with no witnesses, solving the case seemed unlikely. It was hard to deny that David was careless for not locking his bike. To the police, this theft was just a routine incident usually resolved through compensation from the logistics company. However, the next morning, David called the officer on duty with some important news. 2 of the stolen packages contained bourbon worth over 2,000 yuan. Although he felt helpless, he agreed to compensate the sender and requested a reshipment. The sender, however, said they were out of stock and insisted that David urgently retrieve the stolen whiskey. Then, the furious sender threatened David, saying that if he couldn't recover the whiskey, they would file a complaint against him. David replied helplessly, "It's the police's job to catch the thief. I can't do anything. Feel free to complain. It's indeed my responsibility." After a brief silence, the sender hesitantly said, "Actually, those aren't bourbon bottles. They contain chemicals that could kill someone if ingested." David's heart sank, and he immediately reported the situation to the police. In the courier business, there are many banned hazardous materials. Although major logistics companies conduct thorough checks, risks still exist. Who would suspect a customer hiding banned substances in a whiskey bottle? The police took this seriously. Chief Chin Kong quickly contacted David, asking him to reach out to the sender. Once the call was connected, Chun Kong inquired about the chemical inside the whiskey bottles and its dangers. The sender hesitated before finally revealing they contained high-purity methanol, which could be fatal if ingested. Hearing this, Chun Kong felt slightly relieved. Methanol has a strong odor, and the cap would release a smell if opened. As long as nobody drank it, there should be no issue. Just as he was about to hang up, the sender urgently pleaded, "Officer, you must recover it quickly. We can't afford any problems." Chun Kang's heart tightened, realizing the severity of the situation. He pressed further, "Tell me the truth. What's really in those bottles?" After some hesitation, the sender finally confessed, "It's methyl fluoroacetate." Methyl fluoroacetate? Chun Kang's heart raced, realizing it was a highly toxic chemical, volatile enough to cause poisoning through inhalation, and could be deadly in severe cases. He quickly asked, "Just opening the cap could lead to poisoning, even if no one drinks it?" The sender nervously replied, "Theoretically, yes." A chill ran down his spine as a horrifying image flashed in his mind. If someone opened a bottle at a banquet, releasing toxic gas and causing people to collapse one after another, it would be unimaginable. Cursing under his breath, he exclaimed, "You idiot! Why didn't you say this sooner? If someone dies, you'll face the consequences." In a state of emergency, he promptly reported to the city bureau. Director Zhu Wei immediately mobilized police resources to form a special task force, taking charge himself, and ordered them to find the thief. One night had passed since the incident, and Zhu Wei worried the fake whiskey might have already been opened, leading to a poisoning incident. He issued an urgent notice requiring all precincts and police stations to report any poisoning incidents immediately. Since the case originated from a stolen motorcycle, Zhu Wei suggested starting the investigation there and arranged for David to come to the city bureau's monitoring center. Upon arrival, I introduced myself. "Hello, I'm Laura, the head of the task force for your case. Today, I'd like you to review the surveillance footage from around Happiness Garden to see if we can find your motorcycle." I led him into the monitoring hall and asked him to examine each clip closely. Nearly an hour later, he finally spotted the thief riding his motorcycle in one of the videos. Unfortunately, the footage was blurry, and the speed made it impossible to see the thief's face. David sighed in disappointment. "Officer Laura, I can't identify him. What do we do? Are you sure that's your motorcycle?" He nodded firmly. "Absolutely. That makes it easier. Every intersection has surveillance. If we know his direction and time, we can trace him. We can follow the route and find his hideout." Sure enough, after checking the footage from each intersection, we discovered the thief headed east, passing several intersections before disappearing at the intersection of Pingtian Bridge in Wonjong Village. Wonjong Village is a city village with many migrant workers, and the environment is complicated. I had the tech team pull up relevant surveillance footage in hopes of finding more clues. After a thorough search, we finally spotted the thief outside a convenience store. The footage showed him riding past the store and turning into a nearby narrow alley. From this, we deduced that he likely lived there. 30 minutes later, we arrived in Wonjong Village, blocking the alley's entrances and searching house by house, ultimately catching the sleeping suspect. I immediately asked, "Where are the 2 bottles?" At first, he pretended to be confused, claiming he didn't understand. But when I mentioned that the contents of the bourbon bottles could be lethal, his expression changed dramatically, and he nearly wet himself. Seeing his reaction, it was clear he was the thief. Afraid of a manslaughter charge, he immediately confessed everything. The suspect's last name was Yang, known as Jake. He was a trash collector but had a side hustle. During the day, he rode his 3-wheeled motorcycle through various neighborhoods collecting junk. If he spotted a cheap bike or old appliance, he would mentally note it, waiting for a chance to steal it and sell it for a few $100. The evening before the incident, around 7 o'clock, Jake intended to steal an old bicycle from Building 6 in Happiness Garden. However, upon entering the building, he realized the bike was missing. Frustrated, he left and unexpectedly spotted a 3-wheeled motorcycle parked below Building 7. As the courier hurried upstairs, Jake had an idea. Seeing nobody around, he approached the motorcycle and found the keys still in the ignition. Delighted, he jumped on the bike, turned the key, and sped off. Back at his place, Jake was thrilled as he counted his loot. 1 motorcycle and 6 packages. Opening them, he found shirts, shoes, pants, and 2 bottles of bourbon. He thought to himself that he usually drank cheap liquor, never having tasted bourbon before. Excited to treat himself, he almost opened a bottle but reconsidered. The liquor was worth over 1,000 yuan, which felt too extravagant. He decided to keep the whiskey safe and rushed to the scrapyard. He knocked on the door of the scrapyard, answered by the owner, John Smith. John and Jake had a long-standing arrangement to deal in stolen goods. Jake pushed the motorcycle into the yard and asked, "How much is this bike worth?" John circled the bike. "You hit the jackpot today. I'll give you 200 yuan for it." "Only 200? Things are tight now, and with the new year coming up, who knows when I can sell it?" Not wanting to argue, Jake followed John inside. After getting his money, he asked, "Do you take liquor?" "What kind?" "Bourbon." "Let me see. It's not fake, is it?" Jake opened a plastic bag and placed the bottles on the table. Who would send 2 fake bottles from so far away? "Look at the packaging. It's clearly real." John raised an eyebrow, unable to discern anything wrong. "How much do you want for them?" 1,000 for both. "You're bold to ask that. Setting aside the issue of authenticity, even if they are real, this is stolen property. Nobody will pay that much." Jake thought to himself. Besides John, he didn't know anyone else. Selling to a stranger could lead to trouble if he got reported. "How much can you give me?" 300 for the 2. Not a cent more. Hearing 300, Jake was disappointed. John noticed his hesitation and gestured to the food on the table. "You haven't eaten yet, right? How about this? I'll treat you to dinner and drinks." Jake was hungry and figured that getting 300 was easy money, and being able to drink felt rewarding. "Fine, 300 it is, but I have a condition." He pointed to the bourbon. "I want to try this." John cheerfully replied, "No problem. We'll finish 1 bottle tonight. I'll save the other for New Year's." He pulled out 300 yuan bills. "Here's the money for the liquor." Jake happily accepted the cash and opened a bottle of bourbon. Just as he was about to drink, John suddenly stopped him. "Not so fast. This is good liquor and needs good food. I'll get a couple of side dishes so we don't waste it." John went to prepare 2 meat dishes, and just as they sat down to open the bourbon, there was a loud banging on the iron door outside. Both John and Jake were startled, realizing they had forgotten about the motorcycle in the yard. The police might have arrived. While they were in a panic, a voice shouted from outside, "John, let me in." John breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't the police but Billy Johnson. However, he soon felt uneasy. Billy was a local thug who frequently harassed him. Since finding out about John's dealings in stolen goods, Billy was coming around even more, leaving with something each time. His arrival was definitely not a good sign. Despite being annoyed by Billy's demands, John couldn't ignore him and quickly opened the iron door with a fake smile. "Billy, it's late. What brings you here?" Billy strode into the yard and pointed to the motorcycle in the corner. "Nice bike. Just bought it, huh?" He then walked into the back room and kicked open the door. Jake recognized Billy and quickly stood up to greet him. "Hey, Billy. Who's this?" John hurriedly explained. "Just a friend from deliveries. We were about to have a drink together." He felt anxious the entire time. Billy noticed the 2 bottles of bourbon on the table and smirked. "Wow, you're stepping up in the world. Drinking bourbon now. Huh? Stolen, I assume." "Billy, you came at the right time. Join us for a drink." John quickly tried to accommodate him. Billy waved his hand. "Nah, no drinking for me. I've got important business tonight." He looked around the room, saw another bottle of bourbon in a plastic bag, grabbed it, picked up the other one from the table and said, "You two shouldn't waste this good liquor. I have something big going on tonight, and I need these 2 bottles. Let's say I'm borrowing them. Okay?" Everyone knew that people like Billy never returned what they borrowed. John felt frustrated but didn't dare refuse. Instead, he tried to please him. "No problem, Billy. I actually meant to save that bottle for you." Billy gave John a satisfied pat on the shoulder. "All right, you're a good friend. Call me if you need anything in the future." With that, he left with the 2 bottles of bourbon. John quickly walked him out. "What's this big business of yours?" Billy grinned. "I have a huge deal going down tonight. If it works out, heh." He left without finishing his sentence. Once he was gone, John vented to Jake, "Damn it, that bastard is like a robber. If he keeps pushing me, I might just stab him one day." How could John not be furious? It was like a thief running into a robber. The bourbon that rightfully belonged to him was gone. Jake thought to himself that the money was now in his pocket, and the loss was all John's problem. Still, he worried John might try to get those 300 yuan back, so he decided to leave first and said his goodbyes. To his surprise, John stopped him. "Where are you going?" "I've cooked. Sit down and have a couple of drinks with me." He pulled out a bottle of cheap liquor from under the bed, cracked it open, and poured while cursing. "Damn it. I hope those 2 bottles of bourbon are fake and make that bastard fall dead." Jake quickly chimed in. "Yeah, maybe they are fake and kill him." They both downed the cheap liquor, their faces flushing with alcohol. Little did they know, their words would come back to haunt them. According to Jake's confession, the 2 bottles of bourbon should now be in Billy's possession. Chief Chin Kong, who knew Billy, immediately took us to his place. We knocked on his door for quite some time, but there was no response from inside. I had a bad feeling. Had Billy overdosed? It was an urgent situation, so I ordered the door to be forced open. Once the door was ajar, I had 2 officers put on gas masks and enter to check the situation. Moments later, they came out to report. "There are no bourbon bottles here, but there's a man lying face up on the living room floor. He's dead." After confirming, Chief Chun realized it was Billy. There was no suspicious odor inside, but signs indicated the place had been ransacked. I crouched down to examine the body closely, finding it stiff, clearly having been dead for some time. There were visible strangulation marks around his neck and blunt force trauma to the back of his head. It was evident that Billy hadn't died from poisoning. He had been murdered. The bourbon had disappeared, and now there was a murder. We searched Billy's place thoroughly but still couldn't find those 2 bottles of fake bourbon. Did he give the liquor to someone, or did the killer take it? According to Jake's account, Billy left John's scrap yard after 10 p.m. last night. It was late enough that he likely wasn't out delivering gifts. Furthermore, the condition of the body indicated that he died around the same time, suggesting he met his fate shortly after leaving the yard. Based on this analysis, it seemed highly likely that the 2 bottles of fake bourbon were taken by the murderer. If we could find the killer, we might retrieve the stolen liquor, but now we had no leads on the suspect. How could we proceed? Billy was tall, but given the state of the crime scene, there were no obvious signs of a struggle. It appeared the killer had taken him by surprise. Moreover, whoever was able to call Billy and get him to open the door at night was likely someone he knew. I decided to split our team into 3 groups, One would interview Billy's friends and acquaintances to find potential enemies. Another would review the surveillance footage around the neighborhood for suspicious individuals, while I took a team to John's scrapyard. From Jake's account, John and Billy had a relationship, and he had been extorted by Billy multiple times. After losing 2 bottles of bourbon last night, John had a motive for revenge. I planned to arrest him for receiving and disposing of stolen goods. After bringing John in, we conducted a thorough search of the scrapyard but found nothing. Knowing Jake had been arrested, John quickly confessed to the laundering of stolen goods but flatly denied any involvement in the murder, insisting he had been drinking with Jake all night until dawn and hadn't left the house. I sternly said, "Stop lying. Jake has already confessed that while drinking with you last night, you mentioned wanting to kill Billy." In a panic, John shouted, "I did say that, but it was just talk. I love drinking. But how could I kill someone over 2 bottles of bourbon?" I carefully observed his expression. He didn't seem to be lying. "Then tell me who else would want to kill Billy? Who else has mentioned wanting him dead?" To distance himself from suspicion, John quickly listed several names, local merchants on the street. It was true. Someone like Billy was despised, and many had been extorted by him. Everyone would want him gone. I suddenly felt I was asking a pointless question but noted down the names anyway. Just as I was about to leave to investigate, the officers reviewing the surveillance footage near Billy's place made a new discovery. They spotted a man in a down jacket carrying a suitcase at around 1 a.m. in the footage from an internet cafe. About half an hour later, the same man returned, now carrying a black plastic bag in addition to the suitcase. I immediately took John to review the footage. Unfortunately, the lighting was poor, and the man kept his head down, his hat obscuring his face, making it impossible to identify him. John recognized the black plastic bag and insisted, "Those 2 bottles of bourbon were definitely in bags like that." Great. Even though we couldn't see his face, he was likely the person who took the bourbon from the victim. It was almost certain he was the killer. We thought we could track this person through other surveillance cameras, but after searching, we found nothing, and the case stagnated again. In desperation, the task force decided to take the slow approach. We would systematically check each resident in the area, hoping to uncover any suspicious individuals. Meanwhile, Chun Kong and I headed to the Golden Luxury Hotel, where Billy worked, to speak with the security manager about any recent problems Billy might have had or unusual behavior. The security manager, surprised to hear about Billy's murder, thought for a moment and replied, "Billy was definitely the kind of guy to make enemies, but it wouldn't go so far as to get him killed. As for unusual behavior, there were some." I pressed, "What kind of unusual behavior?" "Over the past month, he's been coming to work on time every day, unlike his usual laid-back self. He often stayed in the surveillance room reviewing footage." I felt a spark of interest and asked, "Do you know what he was reviewing?" "Once, I saw him watching old surveillance footage. When I asked what he was doing, he mysteriously said he was planning something big. Oh, and the front desk mentioned he frequently checked the guest check-in records." Why was he reviewing footage and guest check-in records? Was he looking into the business John mentioned, and was this connected? A flood of questions raced through my mind. I knew from Billy's record that he had a history of extortion. Could it be that he had tried to extort someone again and ended up in trouble? I had a hunch that Billy's death might be linked to his surveillance and the guest records, but that was just a speculation. Solving a case relies on evidence. 2 days passed with no progress in tracking down the killer, and the 2 bottles of fake bourbon remained missing. The only silver lining was that there had been no reports of chemical poisoning in the city during this time. However, the quietness felt like a ticking time bomb, poised to explode at any moment. I had been ruminating on the big business Billy mentioned. The security manager pointed out that Billy frequently reviewed footage and guest registration details, clearly for a purpose. If we could identify who he was looking into, it might lead us to a breakthrough. The headache was that the Golden Luxury Hotel registered hundreds of guests each day, thousands each month, tens of thousands each year. Where do we even begin to investigate? Around noon, I received a call from Chen Kong. He said David Wong had seen Billy. Today, when David went to claim his motorcycle, he noticed Billy's photo on the desk and casually remarked, "This guy looks familiar." Chun Kang's professional instincts kicked in, sensing a clue, and rushed to inform me. I quickly made my way to the police station to meet David. Once seated, I held up Billy's photo and asked, "Do you recognize him?" After a moment's thought, David replied, "Not really, but I've seen him around. Isn't he a security guard at the Golden Luxury Hotel?" He approached me about a package a while back. I told him, "This man is dead, and he lost those 2 bottles of fake bourbon." David gasped, "Oh, that guy seemed tough. I had a disagreement with him. He definitely didn't seem friendly." "Why?" I pressed further. "He wanted to send a package, something small like a USB drive, and the recipient was in our city. He insisted I give him a discount, claiming the size of the item didn't match the delivery distance, so the shipping cost shouldn't be the same. We argued for a bit, and I finally told him that if it was so close, he might as well deliver it himself." After hearing that, he clenched his fists like he wanted to hit me. My mind lit up, and I quickly asked, "Wait, he wanted you to send a USB drive? And the recipient is definitely in the city?" "The recipient is certainly local. I can say that with 100% certainty." David hesitated for a moment. "But I can't say for sure if it was a USB drive. The item was wrapped in paper, and when I squeezed it, it felt like a USB or a card reader." I pressed on, "Do you remember the recipient's detailed address and name?" He strained to recall. "I think it was either the Industrial and Commercial Bank or the Construction Bank. I remember it was a bank. I can check the receipt when I get back." I jumped up in excitement. "Let's go check the receipt now." "David, you might have just uncovered something huge." Based on David's feedback, a man named Gregory Greg Parker came into view. Investigations revealed that he was the president of a local bank. I then took a team to the Golden Luxury Hotel to review the relevant surveillance footage. I suspected that Billy was looking into Greg, as the identity of a bank president perfectly matched Billy's extortion targets, and his death was likely linked to Greg. Recently, numerous scandals involving judges and officials engaging in illicit activities had made headlines, with all involved tarnished and facing consequences ranging from dismissal to imprisonment. These incidents were often sparked by someone leaking hotel footage of their affairs online. While most people watched these news stories as mere spectators, cheering or reveling in the downfall of others, Billy, working as a security guard at a hotel, saw an opportunity for profit. Although he had engaged in petty extortion before, he wanted something bigger. He figured frequent hotel trysts could be his ticket to a substantial payday. If he could capture video of a high-profile person engaging in an affair, he could reel in a big catch. Reviewing the hotel surveillance confirmed my suspicions. We noticed a Maybach S450 repeatedly appearing on the camera at the hotel entrance. The owner was indeed Greg. Each time, a young woman would get out and walk into the hotel while Greg would park the car and follow her. The footage showed that after entering the lobby, Greg did not check in at the front desk but instead sat on a sofa, browsing through a newspaper while occasionally checking his watch, as if he were waiting for someone. The young woman checked in at the front desk before heading to the elevator, glancing back at Greg before disappearing around a corner. As soon as she turned the corner, Greg got up and walked toward the elevator. Notably, the footage indicated that this woman was a frequent guest, only staying for about 2 hours each time. We reviewed her check-in information and found that each time, she was in the same room as Greg. Clearly, they were having an affair. Investigating further revealed that the young woman was an intern reporter at a local television station, recently hired, yet living a lavish lifestyle with an unclear source of income. It seemed likely that Billy had noticed this situation. He probably accessed the surveillance footage intending to copy the videos and mail them to Greg on a USB drive to extort him. Greg, realizing the gravity of the situation, would be eager to buy the footage. They arranged to meet at Billy's apartment on the night of the 14th, agreeing that money would exchange hands along with the videos. However, Greg, worried that Billy might keep a backup, decided he needed to eliminate him during the transaction. This gave Greg a strong motive for murder, and he was quickly identified as a prime suspect. Yet, after comparing the surveillance footage from the internet cafe, it became clear that Greg was not the killer. The man wearing the down jacket was younger and taller than Greg. I speculated that Greg might have hired someone to carry out the murder. If that were true, he must have been in contact with the killer on the day of the incident. I immediately requested all of Greg's phone call records. After meticulous comparison, we pinpointed a specific phone number that had been in contact with Greg multiple times on the night of the incident and the following morning. The carrier's registration showed that this number belonged to Chris Parker, the head of security at Greg's bank, and his nephew. We promptly headed to Chris's house to make an arrest. Under his bed, we found the 2 bottles of fake bourbon we had been searching for, fortunately unopened. According to Chris, after Billy sent the USB drive to Greg, Greg was filled with dread over the possibility of his affair being exposed. So he quickly contacted Billy to negotiate the purchase of the video, ultimately agreeing on a sum of 1 million yuan to be delivered on the night of the 14th. That night, Chris brought a suitcase filled with 1 million yuan in cash to Billy's apartment. Billy eagerly asked, "Have you brought the money?" Chris set the suitcase on the coffee table, opened it, and revealed it was stuffed with 100 yuan bills. Billy had never seen 1 million yuan in cash before. His eyes lit up, and he reached for it. But Chris stopped him, saying, "What about the videos?" Billy quickly pulled out the USB drive and handed it to Chris. "All the videos are on this." Chris looked at him suspiciously. "You didn't keep a backup, did you?" Billy patted his chest to assure him, "Absolutely not. As long as the money is in hand, there's no risk." After considering this, Chris nodded. "That's good." He then packed the USB drive back and pushed the suitcase towards Billy. "This is yours. Take a look." Billy waved his hand. "No need. I trust you guys. It's from the bank. It can't be wrong. Let's celebrate our partnership with a drink." He reached for the bourbon. "Nice liquor, but let's check the money first and write a receipt. That way I can report back to my boss. We can drink after you finish writing," Chris suddenly suggested. Chris pulled out paper and a pen and placed them in front of Billy. Helpless, Billy handed Chris the bourbon, saying, "You open it first, and I'll write you a receipt." Chris took the bottle, pretended to uncork it, and as Billy bent down to write the receipt, he suddenly pulled out a hammer and smashed it into Billy's skull, then strangled him with a rope. It turned out that Greg had already planned to eliminate Billy to prevent any loose ends, assigning Chris to kill him during the transaction. After succeeding, Chris carefully searched the apartment and Billy's belongings, finding no other USB drives or hard drives, and began to clean up the scene, wiping away fingerprints and footprints to leave no trace. However, fate intervened. As he was leaving the murder scene, he succumbed to greed and took the 2 bottles of bourbon. He claimed he intended to take them home for a family feast during the new year to show off to friends and relatives. In an ironic twist of fate, those 2 deadly fake bourbon bottles became the very evidence the police had been desperately seeking. While they didn't directly cause his demise, they served as the most crucial piece of evidence linking the murders of Billy and his uncle.